I am Cynthia Wheelis, and I am judge of the 417th District Court in Collin County. I am wanting to also say welcome back to our viewers online. I know we had a really good showing both in person and online, and so I just want to give a shout out to those people that were not on the original short list. I have been a judge of a general jurisdiction court, which gives preference to juvenile cases. So I have all juvenile jurisdiction in my county, and I have child welfare jurisdiction shared by another 6 judges. And then I have a smattering of civil, and then a large docket of family law. My favorite are juvenile delinquents. I believe them to be the most fantastic messengers of how tough our world has gotten. I often tell them they're the canaries in the coal mine, and they are like completely perplexed because it's a really old saying. And so I tell them the terrible story of how the canary dies when the miners are in trouble, so they should exit the underground. And they're all like, oh, I can't believe they killed those. So we have a group of children that we work with, and I know I'm looking out on a friendly audience when I say that they are just kids making mistakes, kids needing services, and we're here to bring it to them. So I also want to say a bit about how important I think it is, the work of this commission. I have been so gratified to be a member of this commission since its inception. And I just want to say my hat is off to Christy Taylor, Molly Davis, and the entire team, because they have absolutely devoted themselves to bringing you a mix of information from all the areas that we deal with and all the overlap areas. And they aren't just sitting around observing the problem, they are getting in there and telling us how to work with the problem. I have also led work on eliminating disproportionality and disparities in our courts and in the child welfare system. I do want to say that from my years on the bench, I have observed that young children, especially those in the child welfare and juvenile justice system, often need help to build that resilience that they need to meet those obstacles and adversities in their lives. These children need to increase their strength to manage the challenges they will face as adolescents and adults by starting early, and I mean early, with young children. Parents, providers, and community supports can work together to build the resilience of our most vulnerable youth. It is way more difficult to be kids today. The aggressive social media, the punishing academia perfectionism, the extracurricular perfectionism, and all of that doubled the homework, maybe tripled the homework that I took home. It is my pleasure to serve as your afternoon announcer, and I do want to say that Dr. Connie Almeida is a rock star. We have a lot of rock stars in this afternoon, so I know what Judge Betancourt was talking about. Dr. Connie Almeida is a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas and a licensed specialist in school psychology. She received her PhD in psychology from the University of Maryland in 1985, followed by postdoctoral specialization in developmental disabilities at the University of Massachusetts. Dr. Almeida has provided and managed clinical services to children and adults with mental illness, substance abuse, intellectual and developmental disabilities for over 35 years. I know, she does not look that. In October of 2010, Dr. Almeida joined Fort Bend County, Texas, as founding director of the Behavioral Health Services Department. Dr. Almeida, welcome.
Thank you, Judge. I think I do have to change that because I'm starting to feel very old. Can you hear me? You're good? Okay. Thank you. You know, I'm absolutely delighted to be asked to present at this amazing conference. It's just, and also I serve on the commission, so I'm just honored to be here and to serve on the commission. And again, as Judge said, you know, we're trying to bring you just sort of experts in the state of the art of what is being done in the state of Texas. And I think one of the reoccurring themes is we can do this not by ourselves, but together. The collaborations are amazing. I don't know if some of you had an opportunity to participate in one of the previous sessions on the first program that they're doing in Harris County around juvenile diversion. And it was just so enlightening to kind of come together and go, okay, we don't have the answers, but we're committed to figuring out together. So thank you. So let me see. Oops, I don't, oh, sorry. Okay, let's see if it works. Well, maybe not. Yeah, I think I can just do the clicker.
Arrow form.
Oh,
Oh, it took it off of the playing
sorry.
slide presentation. There you go. Perfect. This big one is the.
They're going to fix it for
Okay.
me. Sorry. See, this is collaboration at work.
That's right.
So, thank you. And this should work?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's me. So as Judge said, it's sort of, I have an interesting background. I have a PhD in applied developmental psychology, and I was really interested in that because I actually have a background in biology, chemistry, engineering, so I was really fascinated about biological basis of behavior. So I thought that was great. You know, I was going to learn about developmental problems and learning disabilities. I'm also a licensed specialist in school psychology, and I can talk to you a little bit about that journey. And most of the work I do these days is forensic, so which is fascinating. So I have been doing this work for many, many years. Started out my career working with people with intellectual developmental disabilities, very serious behavior problems, self-injurious behaviors. Then actually worked with people with mental illness and developmental disabilities. And then moved more over to mental health, and then lately the forensic. I also serve on the DFPS, the Department of Family Protective Services Advisory Council. I'm actually the co-chair. And again, I'm a commissioner on the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health, and have the privilege of chairing the data committee. Just a little bit about myself. Some things that you probably don't know is I'm actually Portuguese, which probably explains the height. But I'm Portuguese and came here as an immigrant when I was 6 years old. Did not speak any English, repeated first grade, and went back to Portugal actually for 4 years, which was a combination of middle school and high school. Came back at the age of 16 and went to college. And I was going to be an engineer. So some of you that have worked with me know I'm passionate about data. I'm passionate about systems, even workflows. I know that that engineering science background has something to do with it. But I'm really privileged to have this journey. Some of it not always positive, worked in the community mental health systems, worked in the schools. And in 2005, it was interesting. I had left the community mental health system, and there was a family court judge that had received a grant to start a specialty court for babies in the child welfare system. Judge Ronald Pope, amazing person. And he asked me to help him start this specialty court. And I'm like, okay, why are we working with babies? I've been working with, you know, kids in the juvenile system, people at the state-supported living centers, you know, prisons. I mean, these high-level needs. And he's like, well, you know, there was this earmark, and we need to start one of these courts, and they're going to give us money to work with babies. And so it's fascinating. We started the infant toddler court, and I'll talk to you a little bit about this because that is part of the journey. We started that in Fort Bend County. We then expanded it to Harris County and worked with Judge Bonnie Helms in 247th Court, if I recall correctly, who actually started, I think, the first family drug court in Texas. And she's like, well, I've been doing this family drug court, but they all have young children and what are we doing about the kids. So that really started that journey. I worked with 0 to 3 in Washington, D.C., but did a lot of work in Texas. And then in 2010, I really had this privilege and honor that the Council of Judges in Fort Bend County decided that they needed a behavioral health services director. So you can imagine commissioners, they're like, really, we're adding to county government? Why are we doing this? Why, So it's been an interesting journey. So started out as a half-time position, and I think I have 16, 17 staff, multiple Department of Justice grants, leveraged 1115 waiver funding. Some of you are familiar with that, to actually fund our crisis intervention team in Fort Bend County and several other programs. But it's been an amazing journey. We also provide the court-ordered evaluations for the courts. So competency to stand trial, sanity evaluations, psychological evaluations. It's really been fascinating. And we'll talk about that. Why should county government invest in that? Now, we are not a long-term provider. We don't bill for services. We are not the local community mental health system. And we really focus on the education and really helping the courts, working alongside our justice partners to fill in those gaps and to guide policies and procedures and funding from a county level. So that's behavioral health services. Oh, and by the way, we are now in our 12th year. So, yes. But I'm talking to you about kids with complex needs. And so hold on, let me put on my glasses. As you get older, I'm really not that old. I really did start very young. So, yeah, I need to change that. Yeah, I really was very young. Youth with complex needs. So, a lot of this is going to be repeat from what we've heard today and yesterday. I mean, Dr. Andy Keller did an amazing job in terms of his presentation. Then I hope some of you had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Lepore talking about trauma and the neurobiology behind that and the importance of connections and trauma-informed care. I mean, it's just fascinating. This was the second time that I've heard him. And again, really, really good to hear. Are you trying to lower it? Oh, thanks. Okay. Is that better? Thank you. I didn't want to lower it because I didn't want to fall apart and all that. But anyway, so kind of youth with complex needs. I mean, we know these kids. I mean, these kids often involved in multiple systems. I don't have the data for Texas, and I actually couldn't find it, but nationally, it's like about half of the kids that come into the juvenile justice system are also involved in child welfare. I think it's actually even higher than that, so those dual youth systems, dual system youth. I mean, and it's really important to understand who those children are, what happened to them, how did they get into these systems. But these are the children that are experiencing this toxic stress and that face these lifelong challenges. As we know, as Dr. Keller mentioned in his opening presentation yesterday, I mean, we are seeing a significant increase in anxiety disorders and depressive disorders, not only among our youth, but you've seen that, you saw that from several of the presentations, but among our general population, including our workforce. So these kids, lots of trauma, okay? Okay, so it can't all be doom and gloom. There are protective factors. We can make a difference. And we can make a difference by intervening early, maybe changing those boxes that we've had, and really looking at how do we support those connections. You all know this, intergenerational patterns of abuse, intergenerational patterns of criminal justice involvement, okay? So often the families are at risk. So how do we do that? How do we create alternative connections that are healthy for these kids? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But that is the challenge. That is the challenge. So a lot of these really great programs, if you send them back home and nothing has changed and you don't have those supports for the families, they're going to come back into your system. I mean, that's what we're seeing. Okay. So these youth, in my opinion, require a trauma-informed approach, and I'll talk about one particular approach, which is TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, but there are several approaches, and also a system of care approach. I was glad to hear that in a couple of presentations. Let's not forget about that. Sometimes we tend to reinvent things and not really take the time to think about, okay, what has worked? What are those core components of what works? Everybody has heard about ACEs. So these serious childhood traumas that may result in toxic stress and are harmful to the child's brain, the child's body. These adversities can impact, the learning, emotional regulations, relationships, result in long-term physical and behavioral health problems, and lack of economic productivity. I was actually reading something. We just got a grant from Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, which I am super excited about, 1 in 8 in the country, to work with parents that are incarcerated and their children. And so, you probably all know the adversity that's associated with having a parent that's incarcerated. Not only the mental health problems, but often the financial stressors, the relationship issues, and so on. But one interesting thing that I did not know was the lack of economic productivity, not only for the parent when they get out of jail, but intergenerational. So there's actually some research from the Pew Commission that it's like these kids that have a parent that's been incarcerated actually have lower earning potential. So interesting. So, I mean, if I talk really fast, I can slow down, but I never know if I'm going too fast or too slow. But, and I forgot where my timer is, but Judge, will you? Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we know this. We know the impact on the brain. We know the impact on learning. I mean, we know this. If kids don't feel safe, they can't concentrate. We know this. We know this fight or flight response, right? I think this is a great quote. This is, I can't hear you. I can't respond to you. I'm just trying to be safe. Unfortunately, that also happens a lot with our first responders when they're in that fight or flight mode. This is actually some information that we have this small grant from Social Current, which I never even knew what Social Current was. So, and it's really fascinating. It's called Texas Change in Minds Learning Collaborative, and we're one of the sites. And it's all about taking brain science and embedding it into policy and procedures. And also importantly, looking at health equity, because trauma impacts people differently. Trauma impacts children differently. There's a disproportionate impact on children that are African American, children that are Hispanic. Kind of back to that data about having an incarcerated parent, 1 in 9 African American children have a parent that's been incarcerated during their lifetime, compared to, I think, 1 in 50 if Caucasian, and I think 1 in 28 Hispanic. Again, these adversities disproportionately impact certain groups of children and families, and we need to pay attention to that. Do you have any questions? No, I'll just continue. So, everybody here has heard about ACEs, right? Okay. This is kind of like, when you think about, okay, ACEs are not only the things that happen to you directly, but it's the things that you've witnessed. This is really concerning for me too, because, you think about everything that we witness. You think about everything that judges witness after hearing those cases over and over and over again. You think about what law enforcement witnesses. This is a really, and I've noticed this in terms of the workforce, in terms of our capacity to deal with this. It's harder. It's harder for me. I have much more. I'll share briefly something, but it was just so telling. After I put together this presentation, I had a dream. and I won't get into the details, but basically I had left a child unattended, and I came back the next day. The child was physically okay, but they weren't emotionally okay. And all my questioning was, why didn't I go back earlier? Like, why didn't I intervene earlier? And it really obviously caused a lot of stress. And I think it's, challenging, because it's like we have to have the capacity and the skills and the supports to do those early interventions, and also to take care of ourselves, because this is very hard work. And again, especially with the workforce issues that we're having. So some of this, let me just pay, so if you have a parent that's mentally ill, depressed, and why I mentioned that, because I think in our mental health courts that are designed for adults, we have an opportunity to intervene with the children. Oh, that sounds much better. Okay. Sorry. But we have an opportunity to intervene with the children. Okay. We know that having a parent that has a substance abuse, a mental illness, is a risk factor for these kids. The child that's been bullied. I mean, clearly that's a problem that we're all trying to get our hands around and try to figure out, how do we protect children? I mean, that is a serious problem. Feels unloved or unimportant, lacks the family support, and has witnessed the violence outside of their home. We have a lot of children that have experienced significant ACEs. So if you think about Dr. Lepore's presentation, the neuroscientific changes that occur as a result of trauma can increase the stress, the anger, impulsivity, while inhibiting youth from engaging in effective coping and problem solving. And also, you see this at an early age. If you remember, like Dr. Lepore said, that attachment usually is formed within that first year. And some of you know the research, the first 3 years are critical to brain development. 85% of the brain develops within the first 3 years. The good news is there's also corrective attachment. Okay, so those kids that have had trauma, we can go in with interventions and do some work around that corrective attachment. Okay, so these risk factors. I think it's just important to remember these risk factors are the same for the systems, whether it's the juvenile system or the child welfare system. The domestic violence, the trauma, the insecure, disruptive relationships. So, and that's really important, because as a system, I really believe this, the more we can do to support that placement, that community-based placement with families, healthy, safe families, we should. So let me share something. It's really interesting. So yes, this was a long, long time ago. My first job. Allegheny County, we looked at 500 kids that went into the child welfare system. Basically, a retrospective study looking at, okay, why are kids coming in? What kind of placement do they go to? Based on clinical needs. I mean, kind of your thinking is higher clinical needs, more restrictive placement, so on. Not necessarily the case, right? Often it's like there's a bed available. You need to get the kid out of an unsafe place. You find somewhere to put him. What we found even back then, and this was in 1988, maybe earlier, 87, I can't remember, was, so the kids that entered more restrictive settings actually had more incidents during those settings. So you think about residential treatment centers, group homes, and it took them longer to get back home. So I say that, and I'm not saying that we don't need a system of care. The system of care needs to include appropriate placements and services for kids, which often can include, alternative family environments, residential treatment. All those are necessary. But I think we have to be really mindful of often just taking a kid out of a family, right? Placing them in another placement where often there's disruptions in placement. I mean, you all know this. I mean, I can't remember, and maybe Judge Helms remembers, or I don't know, but it's like what's the number average of placements for a child in the CPS system? I don't know. There's a lot of work that's being done to support those placements, to work with kinship. And it's interesting because years ago we had models called, family preservation. And I'm glad to see that we're getting back to that. How do we support those families? Because the other thing, too, that we don't want to do is we don't want to just return a child to a home without having those transition services and really in working on that relationship. And that's what we've done with this infant toddler court program. And I'll talk about that. Okay, we know that. So resiliency, and I love this picture, and I believe in this. I mean, well, I've had my own stressors, some really difficult things, some lived experiences through these systems. But there's resiliency, that ability to return to health and hope after traumatic things occur. Hope is important. Hope is, I think that's the saddest thing for me, working in this system and working with these youth, and especially the older youth or individuals in the system, it's that they lose hope. Um, and, how do we help them regain that? So, building resiliency, couple of things. The buffering presence of a supportive, nurturing adult, right? Resilient parents. Many of our children do not have resilient parents. But if you look at the research, it's fascinating. It's like, so even children of incarcerated parents, it's like as long as there's one nurturing, consistent caregiver, really makes a difference. Often it can be, a mom or a dad, but often the grandparent, right? Responsive relationships and positive experiences, building attachment and nurturing relationships, building social connections, meeting those basic needs. Again, how many of you have heard about social determinants of health? Yeah. I'm excited that, this is actually getting some traction. And I think it's actually because of managed care. They maybe have realized that it's maybe less expensive to help somebody with housing and transportation than to get that other admission to a psych hospital or to the ER. Okay, those social determinants of health, it's hard to do, but a wraparound support, your social determinants of health, basic needs. People need to have food, they need to have a safe place to live, they need to feel connected, and they need to have a sense of belonging, feeling connected. Okay. This is becoming more and more of a problem, I think. I think as we see more families experiencing financial hardships. COVID has not helped, of course. Reducing sources of stress in the lives of children and families. I don't know about you, but I feel more stressed these days. I have 2 little granddaughters. I've worked in the public schools many years. I worry about them going to public school. I worry about them going to school. I just worry. There is additional stress that we are all experiencing. And then again, certain groups, clearly have even experienced more of that stress, that disproportionality that impacts, again, the, African American community, Hispanic communities. And we need to be very attuned to that. We need to pay attention to that health equity and work towards that. So building social, emotional skills and life skills. So we talk about that, kids having to have social skills. We talk about emotional skills, emotional regulation, life skills. This is really important. And it's interesting because for many years when I worked with children with IDD, there's a big emphasis, like you trying to change behavior, you have to teach them an alternative behavior. Like, you know, if you want to extinguish a behavior, you have to give a replacement behavior. And it's interesting because then when I moved over to the mental health side, it was just kind of assumed that, oh, kids were doing this because they were choosing to do this, you know. And it's like, well, I think, again, Dr. Lepore made an excellent point. He goes, children don't know, you know, other behaviors. They don't have the other skills that we're trying to get them to engage in. Like, we have to teach them. And again, they haven't learned those. So us just saying, hey, you can't do that. If we don't say and we don't model what should you be doing, kind of that alternative behavior, they're not going to get it. We have to teach. In life skills, I mean, how many children have the skills to get a job, to live on their own, to take care of their young children? You know, we had a case the other day, and it was a young man. He was 19. So he was coming into our system through the criminal justice system and CPS involvement. Of course, he had a 1-year-old. He had been in the CPS system is pretty much entire life. And of course, I asked the question, I said, oh, you know, why didn't you stay in the system until you were like 21 and you could get some supports with college and, you know, some additional supports? And it was like the answer that I have received so many times. It's like, no, when I turned 18, it's like, you know, I've been in the system all my life. You know, I just went out. But I think it's really important about these life skills. Okay, so children in Texas, the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute does some amazing work. They actually have a report on trauma-informed care. It's a couple years old, from 2017, but it's excellent. So they actually talk about this and give you some data on Texas. And, you know, so we have 700, this was back in 2017, so I would almost, who knows what it is now. We have many children that have experienced 3 or more ACEs in Texas. We have many children that have lived with a parent who served time in jail or prison, right? We have many children that are involved in the child welfare system, in our CPS system. We have many children that are arrested and referred to juvenile probation systems. And then again, we have many children in the juvenile probation system that have experienced 4 or more ACEs. And again, I would guess, I would assume, I would hypothesize that that rate's actually much higher than that. Okay, so questions? We good? Okay. Supporting youth with complex needs. So what do we need to do? And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing in Fort Bend County that I think you can do. So trauma-informed approaches, these are the basic components from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. Your trauma-informed approach needs to focus on safety, developing a relationship, connecting with a kid, empowering, giving them choices, peer support, collaboration, and then again, addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues. Let's think about what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. And it's interesting, and I have to say, like, we do this TBRI training. Sometimes clinicians are the hardest to change. Seriously, we've been used to like diagnosing, you know, labeling, and you know, really having this discussion of what happened to you. Also, unfortunately, our systems often don't allow us enough time to stay engaged with that person to really hear their story, right? I mean, you know, I don't know what the reimbursement is right now, but it tends to be pretty limited. So, you know, I really want to have this 2-hour dialogue with you. You know, am I going to get reimbursed for it? We've always been challenged with that, but we know that it's really, really important to hear the story of what happened to you. How did you get here? Connecting, can't overemphasize that. So, systems of care principles, old stuff's been around forever. There's some systems of care models. Again, I believe that the Harris County Harris Center has received a Systems of Care grant for their juvenile diversion for the first program. Systems of care is really a philosophy about how we come together. But think about these principles. Interagency collaboration. We can't do this alone. I would say interagency collaboration and interagency funding. Individualized strength-based approach. You know, like really building on these kids' strengths and really looking at what their strengths are and the family strengths. This cultural sensitivity. And in some of the old language, it still talks about cultural competence. We really need to change the wording and talk about cultural sensitivity, child, youth, and family involvement. Again, we've seen that. We've talked about that. The peers, bringing peers to the table, the peer supports. Very challenging when you're trying to have that at the youth level, from my experience. And also on the other, and also in child welfare, you know, involving families that have gone through those systems. You know, we try to do that, but it's very challenging. But I think we need to do more of that. Community-based services. If you can keep the kids in the community, in a home, in a safe home or home-like environment, do it. I am excited to hear that we are investing more funds and resources into the development of treatment foster care, therapeutic foster care. I mean, they're pretty the same thing. Those are critical. Those are treatment foster homes where the families have the training and the resources and the respite backup, and they're reimbursed adequately to take care of some of these children. Treatment foster homes can be an alternative to residential treatment for many children. And accountability. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about starting early. Why? Because we know that that child-parent relationship is core to the child's development. I mean, if you know, I mean, TCU and TBRI is based on that connection, on, you know, touching a child's heart, connecting to a child's heart. We can make a difference by what we do and what we fail to do, which I think was what prompted my dream. Because I went back, but I didn't go back early enough to prevent that trauma. So sometimes we can't undo the trauma that these children have experienced, but we can make a difference. And I think that's the really important piece. Those early interventions matter. We can change the course of development by intervening early and effectively. And again, I think there's been a common theme throughout this conference. It's we have to make sure we have the right interventions and enough of the intervention, you know, and how do we keep folks engaged, and how do we keep our workforce trained and able to do that. But that is extremely important, because the whole thing is, when this doesn't happen, this is a failure, not only for us, but for the people that we're working with. I mean, how many times, those of you that are therapists or counselors, you know, it's like we recommend therapy or counseling. They're like, oh, I've done this. What's going to be different? You know? So this is the infant toddler court, which again, I had the opportunity to work with Judge Helms in Harris County and Judge Pope in Fort Bend County. But the infant toddler court was, again, a specialty court for young children in the CPS system, right? That really focus about, let's work with parents and their children. So I have to tell you, one of the most creative and cost-effective things we did was we needed a place to do this, to observe the parent-child relationship, to use visit coaching. And, you know, we're in the county. Nobody has space. And I'm like, you know what? I need a one-way viewing mirror. They're like, huh? But we can't do that. Facilities is like, that's going to cost a fortune. And then, you know, and then we had gotten an estimate on a sound system. The one-way viewing mirror, I think, costs $200. Well, now every time we move offices, they just put in my one-way viewing mirror. We have 2 children observation rooms, and they're amazing. They even took out the carpet because they decided that was not, you know, we needed to be more the hygiene and for the children, and put in, you know, this amazing floor with no request, you know. But what that one-way viewing mirror does, right, is that it allows the staff that are working with the families, so we have a child development psychologist, right, and a social worker that are all grant funded. Some are ARPA, some are VOCA. Yeah, they can observe the relationship. They can go in and intervene as needed into the session, right? Attorneys can come and observe. CPS can come and observe. It completely changes the dynamics of that interaction. We have toys that are developmentally appropriate. We rotate the toys. It's quiet. It's positive. It's amazing. And it can be done. $200 for the one-way viewing mirror. So that's what we do. That's what we do is really visit coaching and then TBRI with these families. And then we provide that information to the courts. So starting early, what can we do? So the infant toddler court model, we've expanded that. You can take some of those principles and use them with the cluster courts, with other family courts. Create a space, okay? The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is super exciting, is, and I got to go fast. So, yeah, I'm a trained clinical practitioner in TBRI, and it's like, well, I have no time to do this. I have another staff that's trained. CASA has a couple people that's trained. School district has one person that's trained. Juvenile probation has, I think, 2 people that are trained, right? So what we decided is, well, we'll form a collaborative. We looked at Williamson County. We looked at New Orleans. We didn't need any money. We just needed to come together. It's like, oh, we can form a collaborative. We can just call it the Fort Bend TBRI Collaborative. We have a website. And what this has allowed is it's allowed us to take our resources that we have, and we have trained, I mean, unbelievable. We have like 29 in 1 year. We have 29 agencies that have participated in our trainings. We do it twice a month. We've had 231 attendees plus 71 from juvenile probation. And I believe we have like 50 people that are fully trained as on the child care curriculum, so the 24-hour curriculum. So you can get a child care certification in TBRI that we can provide. Like if you have clinical practitioners, we can do that training. And it's amazing. I mean, our juvenile probation, I think 95% have at least have had the overview in TBRI. This is in 1 year. So then one of our local foundations was like, oh, we want to support you. They gave us a grant for scholarships. We have a coordinator, and what's really exciting now is we are actually working. I work a lot, obviously, with law enforcement, with our sheriff's office and CIT. So, and we're working with TCU about how to incorporate TBRI into CIT training, into law enforcement training. So just really, I would encourage you, if you need help just figuring it out, keep track of data. You can support it through grants. It's a great resource. Have to share that I think our best trainer is actually not a clinician. She is the executive director of Parks Youth Ranch. She has a finance background, and she's amazing. She goes, I didn't know what else to do, so I had to do something. You know, my staff were leaving. Not only do they implement it with their kids, but she implements it with her staff, and her staff retention levels have gone up from 72% to 94%. So I think one of the things is really thinking about how this trauma and these trauma-focused interventions impact our youth and our staff, and looking at how by building a system that really is trauma-informed and using something like TBRI, you know, you can also make it a much healthier workplace for your workforce and really help with staff retention. Obviously, I could go on. I would also encourage, because I am super excited about, you know, working with the parents in the jail and their children. It's like we know that children that have a parent that's involved in our criminal justice system is a risk factor. I would encourage judges to maybe ask, like, what about the kids? Is there something we can do for kids? Is there a case manager that could work with the kids? Because I really do think that that's how we're going to break the cycle of criminal justice involvement. We know that these kids are 5 times more likely to be in the criminal justice system, but we can make a difference that way. So thank you. I know that I went on. I only have 1 minute and 42 seconds left. Thank you.